Captain Midnight.
This video will feature spoilers. Okay, I feel like this is the exact kind of review that will leave everyone vaguely dissatisfied with my take here, because I'm really torn. Superman 2025 is of course Warner Brothers' most important film of the year, at least to their bottom line. It's holding the weight of bringing the DC movies back, taking them in a new direction, and functioning as our introduction to the latest take on the original comic book icon. So under the weight of all that, how is the actual movie? Well, here's the thing. I think I loved Superman himself and his cast. I liked a lot of individual elements at play, but I'm just not sold on how it all fits together, which can often feel jarring and extremely unfocused. That being said, I think I'm leaning positive overall. So if you'll indulge me, I'll go over what I loved, what I didn't, and what really excites me about this take on the character. Before I get into it, thank you for watching, and if you haven't subscribed yet and often find yourself watching my videos, now could be the time.
A hero who's more than a man. He's been called the greatest, the strongest, the first among heroes.
So let's start with Superman himself. I think something you find with this character is that everyone, even very casual viewers, have strong opinions on who Superman is supposed to be, and what a Superman adventure is supposed to entail. Like, this is a character that's been reinterpreted so many times and in so many ways that I'm not sure any of those opinions are necessarily wrong. I know I tend to favor smaller scale Superman stories. That can still mean a lot of things, from episodes of Superman the Animated Series that I watched as a kid, to super early Golden Age stories about Supes going undercover as a miner to expose a cruel boss, to Grant Morrison's stripped down take in the New 52, or even early Smallville. The Superman stuff I gravitate towards tends not to be really large scale and cosmic, but I'm sure there's a ton of people out there who like the exact opposite from Superman, and that's just as valid of an opinion. That being said, I really like David Corn Sweat as Superman and as Clark Kent. Yes, he is very boyish. Like, this is about as far from the mature father figure Superman of the animated series, or something even more in that direction like George Reeves. But as a new take on a younger Man of Steel, I think he does a fantastic job. The film really leans into his earnestness, underlining it in some pretty over-the-top ways, from the gollies to the squirrel saving, but the actor pulls it off really well, taking a script that I think in the wrong hands could have resulted in a Superman that felt like a pastiche, and making him feel like a three-dimensional character. He retains a naivete that feels right, but he doesn't feel like he walked out of a 50s sitcom, which is a really nice balance to strike. I think Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane was also just incredibly well cast, providing a more cynical counterpoint to Clark's optimism. The few scenes with just the two of them are a high point of the movie, creating one of the most believable and well-realized couples in the superhero movie genre. And you know, Jimmy Olsen, Perry White, I think this is just an excellent core cast here. Like, I really do. They nailed it. Now, are the core cast dynamics outside of Lois and Clark explored much? Well, that's where I start to run into some issues. Jimmy Olsen is famously Superman's best pal. I don't think you would really know that from this movie, though, where I feel like they hardly interact and he's kind of off in his own strange little subplot. It's not that I think Jimmy and Eve's subplot is terrible necessarily, though it definitely isn't my favorite aspect of the movie. It's just kind of a bummer how little room there is for Jimmy outside of it. And Perry White, I really like him in the few scenes he's in, but he feels like a glorified cameo. The core cast has to play second fiddle to the Justice Gang here, and I'm a little torn on where I stand with them. So let's start with the positives. I really like those performances too. I knew when Nathan Fillion was cast as Guy Gardner that he was going to be locked in, and I was right. In many ways, this feels like an extension of his performance as Captain Hammer in Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog. It's definitely in that arrogant asshole zone that he can really excel in. The real surprise for me though was Mr. Terrific. I did not know that he was going to be in this nearly as much as he was, and I enjoyed him a lot. Hawkgirl didn't get as much time to shine, but they all had very memorable moments, and they worked together as a trio. What I end up questioning, though, is whether the three of them really belong in this movie. And I know just asking that will be annoying to some of you, but really, in a Superman movie where Superman's cast, and especially the villain, feel pretty underserved, I kind of wish we could have kept the focus a little bit tighter, because it's so sprawling and all over the place as it is, and that's before we get to the clone twist. Now, the Justice Gang really do play into Gunn's strengths in writing flawed superhero teams. I'm not surprised that he was able to do a good job of that again here. If he wanted to make a movie about these characters specifically, I think that would make a lot of sense, and I would like to see it. But as major characters in the Superman movie, I think they do come at the cost of more time with the core cast, who are also new to us and whose story we're tossed right into the middle of. And that plays into the larger issue of it just feeling like there's very little breathing room here. Precious little time where the characters can talk to each other beyond exposition and the many jokes. Some of which land really well, and many of which, at least to me, did not. That can be frustrating when I feel like the best moments of the film are just scenes of Lois and Clark having a believable and well-acted conversation, and those are scenes that really stand out among the mountain of plot machinations at work here. Now, I've seen a lot of people say that the movie has a Silver Age feel to it. I understand what they're getting at when they say that, but to me, it feels a lot more like being set down about 8 issues into a contemporary run of Superman, for better and for worse. Like, it makes a lot of sense to skip over the origin story. I know, who needs to see that again? But I do think the movie really counts on our pre-existing knowledge of who these characters are in a way that, at times, can feel a little bit undercooked. Like, it is kind of funny that Jimmy Olsen is a ladies' man here, but if this is your first ever exposure to the character of Jimmy Olsen, you come away barely knowing anything about him outside of that. Like, I feel like he and Clark barely interact. He and Superman barely interact. If the goal was to establish these characters for a new audience, I'm not sure it always succeeds. If the goal was to effectively set up a Justice Gang movie, I think it does that a lot better. And I'm just not sure how to feel about that. I should probably talk about Lex a bit too. Now, Nicholas Holt's Lex is far from the most complex or interesting take on the character, but he is effective. Despite his convoluted schemes, he is presented as a very blunt threat, with one of his most memorable scenes being where he shoots an innocent man in front of Clark. His self-aggrandizing speeches, his bone-deep jealousy and resentment towards Superman, it's all well-trodden territory, but I would also say that it's elevated quite a bit by a very committed performance. And again, that goes for a lot of this cast, with actors like Eddie Gathegi making a big impact with the screen time they do have. I do wish a little more time was spent developing Lex and Eve's relationship. Now, the detail that he traps his exes in his own pocket dimension is really chilling. It sets the stakes for Eve very well. But she's such a cartoon character in her scenes with Jimmy that I think seeing her dynamic with Lex and how creepy it can be would have balanced that out a little more effectively. She ended up being a very sympathetic and important character, so I wish she had felt like a little less of an afterthought. As for the Kryptonian parents twists, I really like it, honestly. I think it works really well. I've seen some say that they see this Superman origin story as too sinister, maybe too dark in light of what the character is supposed to represent. I view things a little differently. The last 20 years or so of superhero stories have become obsessed with this concept of an evil Superman. The Boys, Invincible, Superman himself in Injustice, and to an extent BVS. Hell, James Gunn has even produced a version of that story with Brightburn. It seems to be the question surrounding Superman that resonates most in the 21st century. It makes sense that a Superman movie released in 2025 would want to tackle this question of abuse of power in some way, and I think how the movie goes about it works really well. The character is still who we always knew him to be up to his adulthood. So when this revelation happens, when it's made clear to Clark that his parents had an agenda that he finds horrifying, shoving in Superman's face that central question that people have been obsessed with for years in a very literal way, and allowing him to reject it on his own terms, I think it makes for a powerful moment, and it was a smart way to go about reintroducing the character, tackling this dark question head on while allowing him to remain noble and heroic. Not to mention giving him an internal conflict that critics of the character often like to claim that he lacks. Now, they're mostly wrong, but it does serve that function anyway. So overall, yeah, I think I lean pretty positive on this. I have reservations. I'm not sure how I feel about jumping between the very grounded and immediate stakes of the two countries on the brink of an invasion and the goofiness of a lot of the pocket dimension stuff. The pocket dimension as a whole just felt too Guardians of the Galaxy to me, but again, that might just be my small-scale Superman bias showing. And I do think there are elements here that feel a little cheap and emotionally manipulative, like the alien baby, or leaning on Krypto's innate cuteness a little too much. And just tonally, it jumps around so much. Now, a lot of that is just par for the course when it comes to James Gunn. He's a director whose work I often like, but I do tend to have a lot of these same hang-ups about, and I do think the script here is a little more haphazardly assembled than like the second Guardians film in terms of its pacing and how much DC Universe stage setting that he feels compelled to do. I don't know, I'm torn. I don't think it's always an elegantly constructed movie. Like the kids raising the Superman flag is such a powerful image that it feels like kind of a waste that Superman is stuck fighting a boring clone version of himself, and the resolution to that story comes down to Guy Gardner and company like doing a funny action scene. Tonally, again, I'm not sure how I feel about that. And I think for some, especially those who do not vibe with its sense of humor at all, it might come off as pretty obnoxious, but I think it delivers such a solid Superman performance, a supporting cast filled with potential, good enough ideas, and well-executed action set pieces that I don't want to sound too grumpy about this one. Even if personally, I probably would have liked a more stripped down, focused version of the film a little more, I have found myself still thinking about moments I loved from it days later. And for every choice I really question, like that boring take on maybe Bizarro Superman, there's another one I really loved, like Superman watching his home videos in the Fortress of Solitude. I don't think I'd call this a great Superman movie exactly, but I do think it features a great Superman and a lot to recommend. And I think that's still pretty high praise.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.